Hey guys, so welcome back to the second part of our tutorial on how to draw that puppy. And this tutorial we're going to focus on color. So let's go into Procreate, and hopefully for anyone that had trouble with line art or wasn't interested in drawing the line art and just wanted to learn how to color, you used the link below in the description to download the Photoshop document of the puppy that we have here. And this is what we're going to get started with. So right off the bat, we can go ahead and combine these layers. I'm going to at least keep the whiskers on a separate layer just in case I decide to change their color or get rid of the line art altogether later on. Okay, before we go any further, I did want to remind myself to tell you guys what brushes we're going to use. So opening up the brushes tab, I only have the defaults in here. So you should be able to find all of these in your settings. We're going to mainly be using the round brush for the coloring, but we might also use the Nico rule. It's this one right here. We might, if we want to do some very detailed line art stuff, go to the sketching tab and choose the technical pencil. Again, I've modified it not to have any tilt. But we also have, for the big soft transitions and gradients, under the airbrush tab, I like the soft brush just because it can have such a large radius. Okay, now let's get back to our drawing. So the next step that we're going to want to do is create a new layer and go ahead and move that to the bottom. This is going to be the fill layer, and instead of kind of tediously filling it in with the pencil, we're going to grab the selection tool and go through and loosely but somewhat within the lines, select our silhouette of the dog. Now that we've got our selection completed, you're going to see those diagonal lines outside the selection. That's perfectly normal. We're going to click the Layers tab and select a color. With the Layers tab open, let's select something slightly yellow, but much more on the gray side. Close our color selection, tap on layer 3, or the very base layer that we've created, and hit fill. So now it's going to fill in whatever we've selected with the selection tool, and we're just going to go in and clean up any areas that we've missed with the selection tool. You don't have to be super precise, but this is going to help speed things up when we're coloring down the line. So just go in and get rid of any of these gaps that you see. Okay, now that we've fixed the selection, let's move on to the next step. Okay, so now that we've got the silhouette kind of selected, a good idea to continue from here is to lock the layer. Again, with 2 fingers across layer 3, you want to swipe to the right, and now you see the checkered board behind our little silhouette, indicating that the layer is indeed locked. So to get a better idea for what sort of color surrounds our puppy, you're going to want to click on the background and drag your finger down to somewhere around the halfway point. The reason for doing this is it allows you to see a much clearer kind of balance, because the colors that you're painting with are no longer super influenced by all the white that's around them. Instead, it has that nice neutral gray. So going back to our silhouette here, we can go and grab a big soft brush. We're going to bump it up in size, and let's add a light gradients throughout the puppy. So with 1 to 2 big strokes, you don't have to press too hard. We're going to do a soft gradients just like that. Okay, now that we've got that, let's go back to the round brush and let's fill in our eyes. I'm going to stick somewhere around the orange area, maybe even a little bit towards the red. Bump us up to a lighter gray. We can go ahead and zoom in. Make sure you adjust the size. Now the reason I'm using this sort of eggshell colored for the eyeballs is eyes are rarely very, very white, and if they are, that white color comes from a very clear light source. So we can start the base of the eye with this eggshell color and then grab something slightly lighter and softly apply it to the insides of the eyeball. Okay, now let's pick a good mid-tone color. We'll go a lot darker. And have some pattern. Some sort of pattern. For example, down the forehead, we can do like this almost W shape and just softly shade that in. As you can see, I'm not pressing down all the way, but I could be. And this is going to apply some of that variation that a lot of dogs, have in their fur. Along the neck, we can grab this darker color and have it maybe go up the cheeks a little bit and stop near the eyes. You can play around and do some silly stuff here if you'd like. We're just making it up as we go because this isn't based off of a reference or anything. This is just to give you the confidence, to just go out there and draw this stuff on your own. And finally, let's do some darker ears. Color the outside, but not perfectly. We want to leave a little bit of this area right here that I'm coloring in right now. We want to leave that the way that it is so that we can later play around with colors there. And finally, around the head area, I think we're looking all right. I want to go in and do a little bit of some interesting color variation near the paws. I think for the paws we could just go up further. So have this slightly lighter gray area be near the belly and wrap around towards the shoulders. I think I kind of like that. I'm gonna leave the paws gray because I'm gonna further lighten them. And then the tail, we'll color it in with that darker color. Okay, now it's really important to not worry about shading right now because we're gonna try and do that all in one layer using a really quick and easy technique. So these, if you can imagine, it's not changes in the hue, it's just changes in the fur color itself. Okay, so I'm just going to fix up any overly jagged lines. We can color in the eyebrows with this darker color too. Let me redo that one right there. Okay. And now lastly, we want to go lighter. And this lighter color will mainly sit near the mouth. So just as before, follow along, just lightly color in. The reason that it's pretty good to have a light hand is you can always, apply a little bit of pressure. You want to see that gradual difference in the application of this color. You don't need to go like super hard. I mean, you could. It definitely depends, but this is kind of the approach that I like to take. That's why I think my drawings often take longer than they should, is I like to apply over time, lean back a little bit, see if I like how it looks. Alright, so let's see if we can add this lighter color anywhere else and whether we even need to. I think we can stand to add just a bit on top of our little Y shape right there. And let's not forget to color in the paws with this lighter color. So for anyone that hasn't used Procreate before or is pretty new to digital painting, if you haven't noticed, the colors are not going outside our little outline that we made earlier. That's why we traced this entire design, because alpha locking it allows us to keep all the colors within. So I can color like crazy and still stay within the lines. Now, we want to add a few of the other colors before we go in with highlights and shadows. And one of these colors is something for the ears. Another thing I want you to notice is a lot of the colors that I'm throwing in right now are not very vibrant. They're not very crazy. And that's because these are good midtones. These are good colors for us to have as the base. And then once we apply highlights and shadows, it's going to have that really nice range. I think we'll keep the nose dark. I'm going to grab a more desaturated pink for the outside and just leave that slightly warmer color on the inside of the ears further into the ear canal. And then lastly, let's scroll over to a slight yellowish color, but then go kind of dark, not full on flat black color, because we want a little bit of the highlights and the shadows to poke through here. And we're going to go in and drop this color into the eyeballs, right into the iris. And I didn't push really hard because I want to leave, if I zoom in, you can see the top right here is somewhat lighter than the bottom. So you want just a little bit of variation oftentimes when applying this stuff. Okay, this is so far our puppy dog. Now the next step is pretty important. What you're going to want to do is click on your layer, hit select. So this again reselects everything that we have drawn on this layer. Let me unselect it to demonstrate what I'm talking about. If I undo the alpha lock and draw this white circle right here, it can be whatever shape. Now when I click on the layer and hit select, as you can see, the circle is no longer, it doesn't have those diagonal lines going through it. And that's because this content was selected, right? So if it's part of the layer and you hit select, it will be selected. So that's when you alpha lock, everything that's within the selection of the layer gets affected. I don't know if that makes sense. I probably confused some people out there, but hopefully not. So again, delete any layers but that we don't need yet. So you click on the layer once again and hit select. Everything not in the layer currently has this diagonal line going through it. So now that we have the puppy selected, we're going to want to create a new layer. And on this new layer, hit that little N. This is the layer parameter, and we're going to want to go under contrast and to the overlay tab. Once we have the overlay tab selected, if I pop open the layers once again, you can see all the other layers have the letter N next to them, as opposed to the brand new layer which has the overlay. So overlay works like this. If your color that you have selected is very neutral, it's going to make very little difference. As you can see, almost no change. If I grab a lighter color, as I apply it, it's going to be lighter. And if I grab a darker color, whatever I'm applying it to, it will darken. So we're going to use overlay, and we're going to go slightly lighter. We're going to apply, actually, let's apply the shadows first. So we're going to want to go just a little bit darker, but now we're going to go to the, I was going to say soft brush, but I think the soft brush is too soft. It's too perfect in shape. We're going to grab the Nico Rule brush and bump the size down a little bit. Now with a light hand, even lighter than that, actually instead of a lighter hand, let's slightly tweak the color that we have selected. I want to see, it's still pretty dark. Let's bump the size down to approximately 7.5 and bring that color up even more. That's not so bad. So now, right underneath the brow line, I'm going to go ahead and drop a little bit of this darker color. I'll leave the brush size in 7.5. I'll bump it down after we need a little bit more precision. We can go ahead and color in the ears. Actually, we can color the ears in completely, because I'm going to go back with the highlight layer, which will be on the same overlay layer. Now I'm going to bump the brush size down to 4 and go alongside the nose, leaving the top portion of the nose untouched, so it has that that medium color, or the neutral color poking through with no change. Here I'm gonna just shade a little bit underneath the nose, implying that our light source is coming from the top, as you can also see from the pupils. Do a little bit of shading underneath the lip right here and alongside the bottom of the mouth, because this part protrudes outwards on the animal, and make our way down towards the rest of the puppy. So here, because he's sitting and that white shape is, if you can imagine, going back towards the legs, because his neck is somewhat poking out forward towards us. This part right here would get less light, and we can shade it up until about the shoulder portion. This part right here, right underneath the front leg, would get even less light, so we can go ahead and shade that too. I'm going to go ahead and drop some shadow underneath the paws, the base of the paws, and the underside of the tail. We can also add some shadows or on the edges of the head itself. Okay, now we have some basic shadows. Let's do one more thing. I'm going to drop the brush size down to what looks like 2.4 or 2.5 and shade a little bit of the eyeballs, base of the eyeballs. And now we're ready for the highlights. And the highlights work the exact same way, except you select an opposite color. Let's see how much brighter this is, because we don't want to overdo it. Okay, that's not too bad. So now using a larger brush, I'm going to just drop the opacity down. Even though I can control the opacity with the pressure sensitivity, sometimes it's still a little too aggressive on these other brushes that I don't use as often. And we're going to drop these highlights along the top of the head, along the ears. Let's go ahead and bump it up towards the forehead too, so the ears look like they're connecting and not just floating there. We can highlight the eyes, drop the brush size even more, and highlight the nose. Remember that our sketch layer is still above this, so some of the highlights won't be poking through until we either get rid of that sketch layer or create another layer on top and do the same thing to it. We're going to want some highlights on top of, on the roof of the nose, that whole mouth area. We can, speaking of, we can even add some right here underneath the eyes, because remember, we have eyeballs and eye sockets, and so do many animals, so the eyes need to sit in those holes. And now fix the little edges a little bit. Maybe go down and highlight the paws somewhat, just like the individual fingers on each paw. Give it a very light touch. We could also lightly highlight the outside of the legs, just the very edges, because those, there's not much stopping from light getting in there. Okay, now we have, oh, and the top of the tail. We can do that too. Okay, so now we can turn off our selection, and that looks pretty good, right? We have some volume going on. If I disable the line art, as you can see from far away, not too bad. We have the beginnings of what looks like a pup. So the next transition that I would do is I might grab the line art, lower the opacity on it, and go in and start detailing. So I'm going to do that with you guys. I'll try not to take too long on it. So because we're on a whole new layer, we don't have to worry about uh, picking a specific light gray or darker gray. We can actually color pick the colors that we see and go from there. So going back to the round brush, I'm going to go ahead and lower the brush size because now I'm working with some more detail, and I'm grabbing this lighter gray color and trying to blend it into the darker grays. I'm also going to grab some of this sketch layer pink, basically the darker pink color that's being affected by the sketch layer. I'm going to color pick that and use it as a little bit of a shadow around the ears. Going back to this lighter gray, just making some very minor adjustments, and I'm gonna do this with one ear and explaining to you guys, and then the second ear I'll just speed through. So I'll try and make sure I mention all the different techniques. So here I grab this lighter gray, and now I'm just going to the outside of the ear and breaking the silhouette. We're going outside the lines because we're no longer alpha locked to specific content. I'm going outside the lines with this lighter gray and adding fur, or a fur-like effect, by just doing strokes. I'll zoom in so you can see a little bit easier. So just going in back and forth, just scribbles and lines. Nothing very, very technical or difficult, right? You just make it fuzzy. Don't worry about having a fine point on the fur. Don't worry about making them super uniform or really long or really, really short. Just soften those edges. Soften those edges and make it more uniform. Or not uniform, just make it more organic and believable. I guess the opposite of uniform. I'm going to drop the brush size down even further, grabbing some of this lighter gray and going into the inside of the ears and adding some fur. So it's nice to have this fur blend into the head. So as you can see, I grabbed a slightly lighter gray color, allowing me to have a base of slightly darker gray and slightly lighter gray to build out that volume. There we go. And we can do the same thing on the other ear, but before I work, I'm going to work my way towards that ear. Again, we can grab some of this lighter gray and get rid of these dark pencil outlines because, well, that just makes it kind of kills the whole rendered look. You have to, either have specific line art drawing, or you got to do something creative with the color of the line art. But if you leave it the sketch pencil, it often will look just unfinished. So again, just like before, we're grabbing this gray color that's right next to the sketch layer, and we're going in and we're breaking up some of the rugged and very geometric edges of the silhouette. Alright, now the other ear, I'm just going to kind of speed up through this because I'm not doing anything new and I'm not using any different brushes from what I've already shown. I'm even going to grab some color from the other ear, and I'll be right back as soon as I'm done with this. Okay, back to regular speed. Let's speed up the result, and one way of doing that is going into our little highlight. Because we've dropped that different color in there, I want to go ahead and bring back some of that white. So I'm gonna not go full white. You could if you want to, but we're gonna get this even lighter eggshell color, and we're gonna fill in those approximate areas. And there you go. It's like dropping white gouache on something. Now along the nose, we want to use a dotted texture. We don't need a texture brush for this. It's really, really simple. Just dots and little short scribbles to give us that bumpy illusion of the nose. And we can grab some of this slightly lighter gray color, and along the bottom here, continue this bumpy, swirly effect to make the nose seem very textured. And we're going to avoid coloring that too heavily down the middle. Now we're going to grab some of that dark color from the nose and continue on down towards the mouth. The mouth still needs some contrast, right? If it's too light, it just looks like it's not really there, it's being lost. So we're going to go in with this slightly darker color and following essentially the same pattern that our sketch laid out. I'm going to go in along the eyeballs with this darker color as well, at least along the top. We could also grab this slightly lighter gray and apply it to the top of the eyebrows to make the eyebrows also feel like they're, thick and furry. Along the edges of where we were shading, I'm going to grab the color and change the brush size to something slightly larger, nothing too crazy, and just using a very soft touch, go along and blend the big bodies of color to one another. So again, if you can see, I'm going to grab this slightly darker color. So here's a lighter color, here's a slightly darker color, and very lightly brush up against it until it starts to blend. If you do this in areas where the color difference is very extreme, it's harder to get a softer blend. So it's still possible. You put a couple strokes down and then grab the in-between color and then rinse and repeat. Just always try to grab the color that is left over from the previous strokes and use that to go ahead and blend whatever you want. Now down here we have some very rough strokes, and that's actually fine since our drawing is, it doesn't need to be detailed down there, right? The face is the important part. We could arguably make the paws look a little bit more complete since they're one of those things that a lot of people find cute. So I just want to soften them up as well. I'm going to grab this not really light gray, but slightly lighter than the highlight, and go along the outside, preferably getting rid of some of those really dark outlines. And this should help soften them. And now I can grab that lighter color and expand the area, its area of influence, just a little bit more. But still make sure that I leave the overall shape to be somewhat visible. And that's this round kind of 3-finger design, or paw, however you want to look at it. Something along those lines. Now, as you can see, we have this darker color here, and then going up towards the shoulder, it gets slightly lighter. I'm going to grab this slightly lighter color and go back down. I'm going to bump the size up to almost 20 and go back down towards the length of the leg, softening it. Softening that darker gray color all throughout. And same with the thigh. The reason I'm doing this is to get a slightly softer look on the fur, and also to help build more of that shape. So along the top here, where the shoulders are, the colors don't mix very well from the previous brush, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that. And any more edges, like around the cheeks here, that I notice need some loving, I'm going to go ahead and make adjustments there too. And lastly, I actually want to fix, well, not really lastly, but I also want to fix this part out here. I'm going to grab that smaller brush, and then using similar techniques to what we did on the ear, you just grab that darker gray color, and you can push that silhouette out until you're happy with the shape. I don't want that loop in there, so I'm going to undo. Again, just tap twice with your fingers. It's always a good idea to move the screen in whatever way you feel comfortable so that you can get the right stroke. And I think that's all right in terms of how it looks. And now along the bottom here, where if you only leave the selection tool outline and the pencil tool outline, if I zoom in close, this right here, you know, it's not too appealing, especially up close. But even from far away, it's very easy to notice these super fine lines. So instead, I'm going to grab some of that color that's near those edges, and I'm going in lightly with this brush and blending. And it's not necessarily blending to the canvas, right? Because the canvas is on a completely different layer. We don't have any of its colors in this current layer. So theoretically, I can change the background and do all of that stuff without worrying about how it's going to affect this image. Okay, now same thing on the other side. So I want you to really pay attention to this line, right? You see how from the selection tool you have a clear difference of, you know, where I selected it. Even zooming out, it has, I don't know, kind of this very geometric and sharp look to it. So I want to remedy that by selecting, again, this color and just going along the edge until I like how it looks. We're just eyeing everything. This is, again, one of those drawings that, you know, you just doodle in class or something, and there you go. Grab some of this darker gray color and add some sparse little, I guess it would be patches of fur, using, again, just scribbles. And vary the length, vary the pressure that you apply, and they're going to start blending in with the fur. They're going to start making sense. Oh, okay, so this dog has, you know, patchy type fur. So that's the idea. And then going along the edge on this side, we haven't really touched this side, but it wasn't as bad as the left side. And then this big piece of fur that's sticking out near his cheek. I don't want to get rid of it. I could, but we'll keep the uniformness down a bit. And then you can go in with a darker color, drop in some whisker hole colors. I don't know, whisker hole, whatever it'd be called. And the forehead. The forehead is looking very neglected. So similar story. Just using slightly smaller brush and selecting one of the halfway colors, I can go in and add these little, almost like drawing grass. If you can imagine trying to transition grass from a light dirt to a darker dirt, this is essentially what you're doing. Using V-shape kind of strokes, you know, you go one way a little bit, you go the other way. Grab some of the lighter dirt color or whatever analogy you want to use and start blending it into the other areas, the darker fur area. And then you can grab some of that darker fur and in the same way apply it to the light. Even a few strokes that might seem super out of place will not be super out of place for the entire, you know, for the whole picture, the big picture. We can also grab some of this lighter gray and include a few rogue hairs throughout. And that's basically it, right? Finally, let's do a shadow. Create a new layer, drop it underneath. We're going to go for something a little bit more. We're going to grab the Nico rule, brush again. We're going to go under overlay, and we're going to select a darker gray. Now, something to keep in mind is the way overlay works is almost always it counts from the center point, a neutral gray. So just because our background is really dark doesn't mean you have to go really dark to see a difference. Even slightly moving down in this gray will net you quite the difference. So don't go too heavy on the gray. Grab something you like. For the eraser, we need some texture up in here. I'm going to grab the fresco and I'm going to erase away with a little bit of texture. That's one thing that you can completely play around with. No textures. Just try not to hide behind, kind of like your inability to paint something. I mean, you could, but you don't want to cheat yourself. Okay, so here, let's say if you have your overlay layer, but you're like, okay, this isn't dark enough, you can always alpha lock, grab a slightly darker gray, and just go in with it. As you can see, it instantly applies a slightly darker color. And I think that's good. I think I'm happy with that. Here we have our puppy dog. Most important thing left to do is to sign it. Just kidding, not important at all. Oh, I almost forgot we have the whiskers still. So the whiskers, we can lock this layer and we can see how it'll look with white whiskers. I like that. They're more noticeable. So let's keep them. And yeah, and now we can sign. So I'm going to go back to the pencil tool. I'm going to grab a slightly smaller pencil size. Put a box around it, and it's 2017. Nice. Okay, here's our puppy dog. I hope you guys learned something. Hopefully it was pretty easy to follow along. I kind of just threw this together. Maybe I'll plan these out a little bit better in the future. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know if you liked having the ability to use the same line art file that I have. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.